The OECD countries are countries that are, at different stages, but relatively developed countries. Countries at that stage of development could not rely only on the increases of what we call factor of production, capital, labor. In most of our countries, actually, the labor force is going to be either stable or actually decline over the next decades because of the aging of the population. In some countries, the labor force will continue to increase, like in the US, but for instance in Europe that will not be the case, and in countries like Japan it's even worse. You can of course inject more capital in the growth machine, in the growth engine of the economy, but that also has some sort of limits, and your returns to additional capital tend to decrease over time. So what is left in order to generate growth? What is left to generate growth is what we call a sort of multi-factor productivity. Is a kind of a residual that you get when you have analyzed all the contributions of the different factors for the growth model. This productivity, this sort of a better way of using your production factors, capital and labor, is pretty much related to innovation. What is behind this better utilization of your production factors is really pretty much related with innovation. So when you sort of, this is the global picture. When you go into from the level of regions, the conclusions are more or less the same. It's true that in the past, regional policies and the way policymakers view the problem or the potential of regions was pretty much related with disparities. The fact that you have some regions growing very fast, others lagging a little bit. That, in some sense, is the normal functioning of the market and the economy, and you just have to adjust these disparities by making transfers. That kind of approach to regional economics doesn't hold anymore, because having these transfers for a very long time is just not sustainable. So the approach now for regional development and for regional policies is one which is pretty much based now on actually competitiveness and growth potential. And the things I said at the aggregate level prevail at the level of regions. In a region, again, is the sources of this productivity that will determine, in some sense, the potential. Of course, regions are very specific, and in some regions is going to be certain types of capital, certain types of natural resources, certain types of labor, certain types of connection, proximity, So the drivers are sort of multidimensional, are many, but the idea is really to ground the potential growth of regions on these sources of competitiveness. And innovation, of course, is one of the main sources of this competitiveness and the growth potential. The OECD just sort of produced a first report on what we call the OECD innovation strategy, and in the context of this study, which is really a policy dialogue among all the OECD countries, there is a book on measuring innovation, and in this book, exactly as you said, we identified a lot of gaps in terms of the measurement of this process. And of course, these more open forms of innovation, these networked forms of innovation, this sort of knowledge, public goods, something extremely difficult to measure. And also because innovation is not only high tech. It's not only sort of this soft, nice sort of technological goods. Are a lot of innovation, very important for our societies, has to do with organization, with people, with the way we organize our society. Think, for instance, on major threats and challenges like, for instance, healthcare or long-term care in our societies. Our societies are aging. Things like long-term care is going to put a very huge burden on the sort of public finances. We have to find ways of generating these services. Now they are generated by families, but probably in the future they have to be generated in a different way. If they are only generated by the public sector, it will be very difficult to finance them. So we have to find new forms of organizing the society to provide these services. This is innovation. This is social innovation, and it's very important too. So you are right. It's very difficult to measure these new forms of innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that the OECD, with other international entities like the EU, have promoted definitions that are used in surveys about innovation. So questions are asked directly of firms: have you engaged in innovation in the last period? Did it involve research and development or not? And we have, for example, in the innovation strategy, evidence that a number of innovations have occurred without R&D. So what you could consider in some cases non-technological innovation, more associated with the marketing and organizational methods. But you have, for some of these social challenges, both angles of attack, if you will, because for aging and long-term care, it might involve some very high-tech, sophisticated devices to confirm that, my relative is okay at home during the day, and that might have a high technological component. But another area, as was mentioned, is in how we go about structuring public services, and that's, for example, another area that the current Catalan Plan for Science, Technology and Innovation seeks to address in a much greater degree, the role to which the public sector in its services. In some cases, these could be done in the market, but in many cases, they're public services related. Catalonia provides healthcare to its constituents. So all of these are going to require a combination of technological and non-technological innovations. Catalonia is a leading region in a lagging country. So when you compare across other OECD countries and regions, you'll see that a number of statistics that are commonly associated with innovation that are used, like investment in R&D, patenting intensity, the education of the labor force, the share of technological content in exports, the level of technology of the sectors that comprise the economy. In those cases, you find that while it's strong within Spain, there's a lot of work to catch up with other OECD regions. What we've seen in Catalonia is tremendous progress over the last several years in terms of R&D investment, for example. I believe that from 96 to 08, I believe it had increased by fourfold the aggregate investment, which is massive. Approximately 2/3 of that amount is performed directly by the public sector. So it shows that even though there have been increases in public investment, there's also been increases in private investment. However, the rapid increase still shows that they're below OECD averages. So there's continued work to be done within the region on what would be called these technological innovation indicators. Patenting rates in Spain generally are lower than OECD averages. Catalonia is in a Spanish context, and so we see some of these patterns repeated within Catalonia. One area where they are particularly strong relative to other OECD regions is actually in the share of the workforce that has tertiary education, and human capital, as we know, is one of the main drivers for an innovation system. So in terms of Catalonia's political approach to supporting the innovation system, there's been a long history. There's been a number of different research plans, and then the most recent that was presented earlier this year for 2010-2013. What they have shown over time is that they have made a strong accent on the research, what we call the knowledge generation side of the innovation system, and that's clearly where there's been active focus in supporting and developing a number of institutions within the region for research, both within and outside of universities. A separate set, for example, of Catalan research centers developed by the Catalan government to address specific priorities of the Catalan region. And these initiatives have proven successful. Some measures of that success are its ability to attract funds, for example, from the European Union, because it means that all of the initiatives to support R&D investment and research, such as attracting good talent through the program of ICREA, such as building this infrastructure of research centers and having them work more effectively together, all that has contributed to this strengthening of the knowledge generation system. Where Catalonia has a bit more work to do is on the knowledge transfer side and then the knowledge exploitation system. You do have a number of multinational firms in the region, you do have private investment, but the firm demography of the region shows there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, and those are the hardest firms to reach in any innovation system. You have technology-based SMEs, and you have those that are maybe not quite as high in technology base, but are a large share of the economy. So this knowledge transfer from research to firms, and then the ability of firms to themselves conceive of innovation and implement innovations, is the area where Catalonia could apply